Marco Siffredi, born May 22, 1979, did what little thought possible. Pushing the limits of mountaineering and snowboarding, his innate love for the mountains left a mark on history forever. Finishing several groundbreaking descents on the world's tallest peaks, Marco's journey was one of passion, determination, and an insatiable hunger for exploration. Growing up in a mountainous region of France, Marco was drawn to the outdoors from a young age. He took to skiing and snowboarding with fervor, developing his skills and honing his craft with each passing year. Marco's incredible talent and fearlessness on a snowboard quickly became apparent, earning him recognition with the snowboarding community. Yet it was his audacious dreams of conquering uncharted territories that truly set him apart. In the late 1990s, Marco began focusing on backcountry snowboarding, seeking out untouched slopes and remote locations where no one had ventured before. In his early years, Marco made several first ascents in the Chamonix Valley before extending his horizons to bigger peaks. In 1999, he made the second ever snowboard descent of Mont Blanc on the Aiguille Verte. The Mont Blanc is a 1,000-meter line averaging 55 degrees, with sections at even steeper grade. Renee Roberts' photos of the descent are truly awe-inspiring. And for those who thought of Marco as just another snowboard punk, the descent solidified his place among the world's best extreme skiers and snowboarders. Marco followed the Mont Blanc performance by going even higher. In the fall of the same year, he added the first descent of the Dorje Lakpa in Nepal. At 3,988 meters, Marco had two of the world's highest peaks in his view. Shishkapanga and Mount Everest were both in Marco's sights. He then contacted the best in the business, Russell Bryce of Himalayan Expeditions, which is a commercial guiding operation specializing in fully equipped expeditions to 8,000-plus meter peaks. Bryce quickly advised the young writer to try his hand at other 8,000-meter peaks before attempting Everest to see if his body could adapt to the extreme altitude, and the two began making plans for another Himalayan giant, Cho Oyo. But first, Marco returned to South America in June of 2000 to summit the mountain known as Huayna Potosí and ride all the way down the 6,088-meter peak in Bolivia. Building up his descent portfolio during the same fall, Marco summited and rode down the previously mentioned sixth highest peak on Earth, the 8,200-meter Choi Oyo. High on these successes, Marco was ready for Everest. In spring of 2001, Marco left for Everest with Himalayan Expeditions. A few days ahead of him was Dr. Stefan Gott, an experienced rider and alpinist with his own successful snowboard descent of Choyo Oyo, as well as a few other peaks. Although Gott chose to climb without the assistance of Sherpas or supplemental oxygen, the two riders shared the same goal, and it would be a race to see who would become the first person to achieve a snowboard descent of Everest. Marco's hope was to summit and descend by the Hornbeam Collar. But when he got to the mountain, there was hardly any snow on the windswept summit. By arriving in the spring, he had a better chance of summiting due to lighter snow conditions, but those same conditions made it impossible for him to realize his original plan of snowboarding down the couloir. But as the climbers moved up the mountain, it was apparent that enough snow had accumulated to enable the descent via Plan B, the Norton Couloir. And on May 23rd, one day after his 22nd birthday, Marco summited Mount Everest for the first time. Alone at the top, he watched the sun rise before strapping in and beginning the snowboard ride nearly 8,000 vertical feet to advanced base camp. He dropped in and started making turns past the long line of exhausted climbers still on their way to the summit. Not far from the summit, his binding broke in the extreme high-altitude cold. Luckily, one of the Sherpas Marco passed was able to fix it. Attaching him to his board with baling wire, Marco was then able to enter the couloir. Shredding down 1,800 meters on slopes of 40 to 45 degrees, he stopped at the North Col to rest for an hour before finishing the last 1,000 meters and arrived at advanced base camp less than 4 hours after leaving the summit. The team was already on the satellite phone, and it was only a matter of minutes before the amazing news spread to every corner of the snowboarding universe. Although Stefan Gott had summited less than 24 hours ahead of Marco, he had taken his board off and down-climbed past 100 meters of the steepest terrain. But because Marco rode all the way from the summit back to advanced base camp, Marco's descent was recorded as the first continuous snowboard descent of the world's highest mountain. After summiting and boarding down Mount Everest, Marco had the other of the two summits in his sight, Shishkapanga, another giant of the Himalayas. Being completely within the border of China, this lesser-known 8,000-meter peak was the next stop along Marco's mountaineering legacy. While Marco believed the Hornbeam Collar was the true north face of Everest and his ultimate goal, he made a quick detour to summit this peak without his snowboard. Finally summiting Shishkapanga, the 14th highest peak in the world, during the fall of 2001, Marco and Russell Bryce spent the following summer in Chamonix. It was during this time that the plan for the second Everest attempt was drawn up. The dangers, logistics, and funding could have delayed and deterred any team, but Marco would not be held back. By early August of the following year, the second Everest plan was set. Marco then left Chamonix en route to Kathmandu, where he would attempt to realize his ultimate goal of descending the Hornbeam Collar. Making his way to Hotel Tibet, he meets up with Furba, Pa Nuru, and Da Tenzi, three Sherpas who will play an essential role in getting Marco and his snowboarding equipment to the summit of Everest. Now being Saturday the 10th of August 2002, the team left Kathmandu and drove north towards Tibet. As part of Marco's acclimatization, he will spend the night in Khatari on the Nepal-Tibet border, where crews will pick up the last of their supplies and then head to base camp. The next morning, the Sherpas organize a puja, a Buddhist custom of offering food, drink, incense, and prayers to the deities in exchange for safe expedition. As the puja draws to an end, the clouds part and the team's energy is renewed by their first view of Everest. Marco studies the north face through a telescope and is happy to find plenty of snow, so much in fact that large slab avalanches were cutting loose all over the face. The Hornbeam Kalar looks GTG, or good to go, but Marco notes that the snow will need to stabilize. The team then spends the next few days at base camp to acclimatize, and Marco kills time by taking a recon mission to the base of the north face. 2 days later, a yak team arrives and the gear is loaded on their backs for the trip to Advanced Base Camp. Over the next 2 days, the team treks their way to Advanced Base Camp at the foot of the North Col. Marco's previous trip to Everest was made in the spring, before monsoon season. It's at this time when there's less snow on the mountain that the majority of Everest ascents are made. But 99.99% of Everest climbers do not come to Everest to snowboard. Marco has come in the fall, after the monsoons, when he can take advantage of the deeper snow. When he arrives at Advanced Base Camp, he hardly recognizes it as the same place where he was 2 years ago in the spring, when it looked like an overcrowded campground. Following the pleasantries, the whole team got a good night's rest and woke up to about 30 centimeters of fresh snow. Checking the mountain, Marco sees that the entire north face has ripped clean, exposing the rock below. He describes the face as a festival of avalanches. The weather falls into a regular pattern of nice weather during the day, followed by snow in the afternoon. Avalanches ravage the face daily, and the bottom of the route seemed icy. Since it was fall on Mount Everest, Marco was constantly monitoring the incoming weather. Jan Giesendanner is Marco's trusted meteorologist back in Chamonix. Climbers have pinned the success of their expedition on Jan's expertise for years. Marco not only calls Jan on a daily basis, but also his girlfriend Stephanie and his family and friends as he waits for good weather to proceed to the summit. With no one other than Marco and his team on the mountain, loneliness and boredom are setting in. Over the next few days, the Sherpas begin fixing ropes and carrying gear to Camp 1, climbing even closer to the death zone above 8,000 meters. Even here, at just over 6,000 meters, Marco is experiencing frequent headaches. At this altitude, everything from putting on your boots to trying to eat and sleep becomes a major pain in the ass. From here on, the only thing to look forward to is more suffering on the way to the top of the world. Over the next week, Marco and his team of Sherpas overcame the storms and bad weather to make it all the way to Camp 3. After jumping from Camp 2 to Camp 3 for several days due to acclimatization purposes, the team settled down in Camp 2 to wait for a good weather window for a summit push. After a few days, Jan tells Marco that Sunday, September 8th, would be a perfect bluebird day for the summit, and therefore the summit push began. Marco and company left Camp 2 and climbed to 7,900 meters as the Sherpas continued to 8,300 meters to establish High Camp. The following day, Marco made his way to Camp 3. The altitude is taking its toll, and Marco starts to feel worked. He calls Jan in Chamonix for the forecast. Jan answers and lets him know that the summit would be clear Saturday night and Sunday morning. Some clouds with possible snowfall, but mostly under 8,000 meters. Jan tells Marco not to stay too late, as the wind will kick up in the afternoon, and the next day is uncertain. You won't have many chances, he said, but we'll talk tomorrow, Marco. Call me when you're down. The following day was summit day, and this was going to be a long, extraordinary day of effort. By 1:30 a.m., the crew had left Camp 3, and the Sherpas began the unimaginable task of breaking through trail chest deep at 8,000 meters. At 2:10 p.m., after 12.5 hours in the death zone, the team reaches 8,848 meters, the highest point on Earth, the summit of Mount Everest. The ascent had taken 3 times longer than Marco's first ascent in the spring of 2001. Sherpa Furba is the first on the summit, and when Marco arrives, Furba smiles and greets him. Reaching the summit of the highest mountain in the world is a time of unequaled euphoria. It's the achievement of a lifetime, the realization of a magnificent dream. But for Marco, the dream is just beginning, and the summit is nothing more than a hurdle. His goal, 3,000 meters of first tracks down the Hornbeam, still lies before him. By this time, clouds had begun to build from below. The Sherpas were concerned about the conditions as well as the late hour. They urged Marco not to go, but everything he's worked for over the past year and a half has led to this, and he may never have the chance again. At 3 p.m., Marco replaces the empty bottle of oxygen in his pack with a fresh one and straps in. Sherpa Furba helps him with his pack, which in addition to the oxygen canister also contains rappel gear and a 3-liter bottle of water. Considering that Marco is about to make one of the most dangerous descents in history, the pack holds only the essentials, although it should be sufficient if everything goes according to plan. Marco then drops in to shred the world's highest altitude powder. Making a few turns, he chose to wait at the top of the Kular's Ridge for the Sherpas to catch up. He's breathing hard, shattered by the effort of making turns with the pack on at 8,800 meters, after more than 12 thigh-burning hours of some of the most exhausting climbing on the planet. He lets the Sherpas pass in front of him, telling them to watch their rope, and then tellingly rides over it as he makes his way left towards the Hornbeam Kalar. The clouds billow up around him, and at 3:15 p.m., the Sherpas waste no time getting down from the summit. As they are packing up their gear from Camp 3, they look below to the North Col, nearly 1,300 meters below them, where they are shocked to see what looks like a man stand up, then silently slide down the mountain. The highly experienced Sherpas are 100% certain that there's no one else on the mountain with them, yet each of them are sure what they had just seen. When they soon arrive at the North Col, where they saw the mysterious figure, there are no snowboard tracks. It is at this point they know Marco is dead. Marco never returned to Advanced Base Camp, and in the coming days, all search and rescue efforts uncovered very little to what happened or where Marco ended up. A memorial was held for Marco at Everest Base Camp almost a month later. Marco's family was there along with his girlfriend Stephanie and his good friends and an extraordinary number of Sherpas. The service was an emotional one, the clouds hung low, reflecting the somber mood of the service. But as the monotone chanting of the Buddhist priest began to fade, the clouds lifted and there, clearly visible at the summit, was Marco's tracks over 3,800 meters above them. Marco's body was never recovered, and no trace of him has ever been found beyond his initial tracks descending from the summit. Without any clue, it's hard to guess what could have happened, but there's a few scenarios. While nothing truly accounts for what the Sherpas saw, the leading theory is he was traversing across the top of the north face into the Kalar when an avalanche could have swept him off the mountain and buried him at the bottom. Another theory is that he lost an edge and plummeted into the kilometers-long Bergschrung at the base of the face. Throughout his life, Marco Siffredi exhibited a rare combination of humanity, skill, and audacity. He was not merely a thrill seeker, but a true pioneer who sought to leave his mark on the world of snowboarding and mountaineering. Marco's name lives on in the hearts of those who witnessed his extraordinary feats and in the minds of those who continue to be inspired by his legacy. Marco Siffredi's life was not solely defined by a tragic disappearance on the slopes of Mount Everest, but by the indomitable spirit he embodied, the boundaries he shattered, and the dreams he realized. Marco's story will forever be etched in the canals of mountaineering and snowboarding history. Rest in peace to Marco Siffredi. If you want to hear more scary, fascinating stories, make sure to subscribe below and maybe check out this video which you might enjoy.